Hi, guys, and welcome back to another episode. If you're new here, hi, my name is Shay, and I am your host of Matcha Murder. New episodes drop on Spotify every Monday, with the video version going live on YouTube as well. So make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. Today, we're diving into the disturbing case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. This case has also been referred to as the Scream Killers case, and as we go through it, you'll get an understanding of exactly how it got that haunting nickname. Cassie was actually filmed at school by her killers on the morning of her murder, waving and smiling to the camera, completely unaware of what was about to happen later that evening. Before we get into the crime itself, go ahead and grab your matcha, and let's start at the beginning. Cassie Jo Stoddart was born on December 21st, 1989 in Pocatello, Idaho. She was primarily raised by her mother, Anna Cisneros, and there's not really a lot of information that I could find online about her father, but what we do know is that her parents were separated at the time of her murder. Cassie also had an older sister named Christy and a younger brother named Andrew. Cassie and her siblings were extremely close to their maternal grandparents, Paul and Josefina Cisneros, and they primarily spent their time between their mother's home and their grandparents' home. Cassie was especially close to her younger brother Andrew, who was only a year and a half younger, and he has said that Cassie was not only his sister, but his best friend and role model. Friends described Cassie as smart, kind, and responsible. She loved music and had a great passion for drawing. And Andrew has said that his mother would proudly hang up Cassie's artwork throughout their home. As Cassie got older, her responsible nature was a big reason of why her aunt and uncle trusted her to house sit for them that weekend that they went away, caring for their 5 pets of 2 dogs and 3 cats. Now, on Friday, September 22nd of 2006, Cassie went about her day as usual. She attended her classes at Pocatello High School, and around 5:30 p.m., Cassie's mother, Anna, dropped her off at her aunt and uncle's house on Whispering Cliffs Drive. She was alone for about half an hour before her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, arrived at around 6:30 p.m. Now, sometime between 6:30 p.m. and 7 p.m., their friends, Torey Adamcik and Brian Draper, showed up to hang out. While they were there, Cassie gave Torey and Brian a tour of the house, which included the basement, where they had actually left the basement door unlocked without Cassie or Matt knowing. And before we get any further into what happened that evening, let's talk about Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik for just a moment. The two met as sophomores at Pocatello High School, and they bonded over their shared interest in films, especially horror movies. Torey and Brian had made video recordings documenting their plans, and in those tapes, they talked very openly about their fascination with horror movies and their desire to commit a killing. They even claimed to be inspired by the movie Scream, which, if you remember me mentioning earlier of why you would understand where it got that title, this is why the media started referring to them as the Scream Killers. But their motivation went way beyond just a movie obsession. They also idolized real serial killers, including the Zodiac Killer, Ted Bundy, and the Hillside Strangler. And in one of their recordings, they disturbingly said, "Those people were mere amateurs compared to what we are going to be." They even recorded themselves inside their school library, creating what they called a death list of potential victims. They had multiple classmates on this list, and unfortunately, Cassie was one of them. Now, evidence from these recordings would later reveal to investigators that this murder was premeditated. They were driven by a desire of infamy and a disturbing fascination with violence. Now, let's go back to the night of September 22nd. After the house tour, the 4 of them had started watching the movie Kill Bill Volume 2, and at around 9:30, Torey and Brian said that they were bored and claimed that they were heading to a local theater to watch another movie instead. Now, I find that a little odd. If I was hanging out with friends and even if I was bored by the movie that we were watching, I wouldn't personally leave to go to the theater to watch another movie. I feel like I would do something else or maybe bring it up to my friends, see if they wanted to do something else. I don't know, I just find that a little bit odd. Now, shortly after Brian and Torey left, Cassie's mom had actually called her to check in to make sure everything was okay. Cassie told her mom that she and her boyfriend were watching a movie and that she would call her the next morning to let her know if she needed anything. Now, at around 10 p.m., Brian and Torey actually snuck back into the house through the basement door that they left unlocked. They briefly cut the power, then turned it back on, but the lights kept switching on and off a few times, and Matt and Cassie actually even heard noises of things being dropped or thrown, and one of the dogs started growling and barking, staring towards the basement door at what appeared to be nothing. Now, Cassie and Matt were both very unsettled by the lights flickering and the dog's behavior, so Cassie asked Matt if he would be able to stay the night. Matt then called his mom to explain what was happening and ask for permission to stay. But because they were both 16, his mom said no, understandably so. She didn't want, two 16-year-olds being alone in a house together for the night. But she did offer for Cassie to come stay with them that night. But Cassie declined. Feeling responsible for the house and the pets, she decided to stay alone that night. Now, Matt's mom arrived to pick him up at around 10:30, and that's when he left for the night. While Matt was driving back home with his mom, he had actually called Torey to see if he could hang out with him and Brian later that night. Matt has mentioned later that Torey was whispering during this phone call, which he thought was because they were actually in the movie theater like they had said they were going to do. But unaware to Matt, they were actually inside the basement hiding from Cassie. And after Matt left, Brian and Torey actually turned the power completely off. They were hoping to get Cassie to go down to the basement to check and turn the power back on, but she never did. They also started slamming doors and cupboards, and I can only imagine how scared Cassie must have been. I know if I was alone in a position like that and I was hearing strange noises and the power was out, I would be absolutely terrified. At approximately 11:30, Brian and Torey came up from the basement wearing masks and gloves. When they got to the living room, the two attacked Cassie while she was lying on the couch. They stabbed her roughly 30 times. An autopsy report later revealed that 12 of those wounds were potentially fatal. Brian and Torey had come prepared with 2 knives, a hunting knife and a dagger-type knife, that a friend had actually bought them about a month prior at a pawn shop. Now, right after the murder, Brian and Torey went back to their car and they recorded themselves on a camcorder. In the video, which later became key evidence, Brian is actually heard saying, "I just killed Cassie and I stabbed her in the throat and I saw her lifeless body." You can also hear Torey snapping at Brian in the background, saying, "Shut the fuck up. We need to get our act straight." Now, afterward, Brian and Torey went to Black Rock Canyon to get rid of their evidence. They buried their clothing, masks, gloves, and knives that they used in the murder. They even tried to burn the videotape that captured both of them planning and the aftermath. The following day, Matt even hung out with Torey, completely unaware of what he had done to Cassie the night before. Now, during his time with Torey, he did try to call Cassie multiple times throughout the day, but she didn't answer and she didn't call back. Cassie's mom, Anna, also tried calling and texting her multiple times on Saturday, but never got a response. And as the day went on, she stayed busy with weekend errands and didn't immediately panic because she knew Cassie was responsible and just figured she would talk to her when she went and picked her up the next morning on Sunday. Now, on Sunday, September 24th, Cassie's Aunt Allison and Uncle Frank returned home with their 13-year-old daughter, and she was the first to enter the house and tragically the one who discovered Cassie lying on the floor near the couch. She screamed, alerting her parents, who rushed in and saw the horrific scene. The living room was in complete disarray. Furniture was disturbed, items were knocked over, there was blood everywhere, and there was clear evidence that Cassie fought back against her attackers fiercely. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms, showing just how hard she struggled against her attackers. Cassie's aunt immediately called 911, frantically telling the dispatcher, "There's a girl dead on my floor." Now that call triggered a rapid investigation. Police initially questioned Anna's boyfriend after his fingerprints were found on the breaker box, but he had explained that he had done electrical work at the house months earlier, and he was quickly ruled out as a suspect. Suspicion also fell on Cassie's boyfriend Matt, as he was the last known person to see her alive. Matt walked investigators through the events of the night and even agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed. Now, during his interview, Matt had told police that Brian and Torey had been at the house that evening. He mentioned that after he left, he called Torey and noticed that he was whispering on the phone, something that Matt assumed at the time was because they were at the movies. But this detail shifted investigators' focus to Brian and Torey, and police interviewed both of them on September 27th. During their initial interviews, they claimed they had gone to see the movie Pulse that night. However, their story quickly began to fall apart when neither of them could explain what the movie was about. A theater employee who actually went to school with Brian and Torey also told the police that he hadn't seen them there that evening. Now, when confronted about their lying, Brian began to break down and ultimately confessed, leading police to the evidence that the pair had buried at Black Rock Canyon. Now, both Brian Draper and Torey Adamcik were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Torey and Brian went to trial separately and were tried as adults. And on April 17, 2007, Brian Draper was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On June 8, 2007, Torey Adamcik's trial was completed, and he was also sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Both Brian and Torey tried several appeals after being sentenced to life without parole for Cassie's murder. Torey went first, appealing to the Idaho Supreme Court in 2010, and Brian followed in 2011. Both had their convictions upheld, though Brian's conspiracy charge was later vacated. Torey later tried to get post-conviction relief in state court, which was denied, and Brian also pursued additional appeals. But in the end, both men's life sentence for first-degree murder remained in place. And in 2010, Cassie's family filed a lawsuit against the Idaho School District, arguing that the school had been negligent and should have recognized that Torey and Brian posed a danger to others. However, both the state Supreme Court and the civil court dismissed the case, ruling that the boys' actions were not considered foreseeable. And personally, I can understand the family's perspective, especially considering that a significant portion of the tapes that Brian and Torey recorded were filmed at the school. And looking back in hindsight, those moments do feel like missed opportunities to prevent such an unimaginable loss. Cassie's murder was tragic and a senseless act of violence. It left everyone who knew her completely heartbroken. She was so young and had her whole life ahead of her, and losing her was just devastating for everyone who loved her. And unfortunately, her family experienced another loss in April of 2022 when Cassie's mom, Anna, passed away from cancer at the age of 57. And that, you guys, is the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. Now, when you really sit with this case, what makes it truly devastating isn't just how violent it was, but how unnecessary all of it was. I mean, Cassie was just a normal teenager doing a favor for her aunt and uncle, and she trusted the people around her, and that trust was taken advantage of in the worst way. Thank you guys so much for tuning into another episode of Matcha and Murder. If you guys have any case suggestions that you'd like to see me dive into, go ahead and leave those in the comments below as well. And just a reminder, don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss future episodes. Thank you guys so much for being here. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you next Monday. Bye, guys.